Hello, chart watchers and DecisionPoint faithful. Welcome to this Friday, April 26, 2019 DecisionPoint show with your hosts, Carl and Erin Swenlin. For those of you joining us for the first time today, welcome to the show. And for our regulars, welcome back. All right, what are we going to cover today? Well, before I go through that, I want to welcome my dad here. Carl is here for the show as well. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Just fine. That's good. As long as it's not bad. That's
right.
All righty. Well, as far as our agenda today, we're going to cover what we usually do to begin the show, broad market indexes. I'm going to show you the price relative for the major indexes with the S&P. We'll do, of course, all of the weekly charts. I'll be looking at the scoreboard indexes, and of course, we'll go through our DP indicators. And then Carl will be covering the big four: dollar, gold, oil, and bonds, daily and weekly charts. But I know what's really exciting for everybody is what is our bonus material today. And actually, we're going to spend all of that bonus time on climax identification. We always talk about initiations, we talk about exhaustions, and those usually are identified by looking at these climaxes that come in on our indicators. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As far as the DP scoreboards go, we only had one change this week, and actually it was a double change. We had a whipsaw sell signal come in on the PMO for the S&P 500. Of course, I'll show you that on the chart. And then following day, immediately, we got the PMO buy signal coming in on April 23rd. So it's been an interesting week, obviously, with a lot of ups and downs. And consequently, we ended up with a signal change here. But I will be showing you most of the others. So at this point, I was looking for this signal to go away today at the end of the close, but it did not. The Dow still is holding on, clinging to its PMO buy signal. And as far as trends go, obviously bull market trends in all three time frames. We're still waiting on these long-term signals of the PMO on the monthly charts to change, but we'll look more at the monthly charts next week. All right, as far as the DecisionPoint sector scoreboard goes, as you can see, we have all buy signals, all of them, except for XLE. We're waiting on the long-term trend model buy. That signal will change to a buy when the 50-day EMA for XLE crosses above the 200-day EMA. So that's what we'll be waiting for, change that signal. As far as the neutral signal here for healthcare, we just need to wait for the 20-day EMA to cross above the 50-day EMA for XLV. So we're watching that closely as well. All right, but as I say, let's go look at some charts. And away we go. Let's see. Here we are. All right, so I am going to start off with our price relative chart of the major indexes. Obviously, we're looking at the scoreboard indexes. There's your S&P, the Dow, NASDAQ, of course, and S&P 100, 400, and 600. And really what I've noticed is, clearly, technology, the NASDAQ 100 continues to outperform the S&P 500. You'll see that on the chart when I show you. It's pretty obvious. Industrial's having a very difficult time, have not been able to get, to start outperforming or even perform in the same wavelength as the S&P right now as far as price. And what I mean by that, you can see it here on the S&P 400 and 600. The declining trend, the 400 and 600 were not outperforming. They were underperforming the S&P, and we've gotten out of that, but now they're moving sideways, which means they're pretty much in line with what's going on with the S&P 500. So one of the reasons we do like to pay very close attention what's going on with the S&P 500, because it does give us information as far as relative price, and it is the major benchmark that we all use. As far as the broad market indexes go, looking at the equal weight and both the SPY, we can see we did make new all-time highs this past week, S&P 400, not there yet. And the S&P 600, IJR, is really behind the 8 ball here. Still really in a bear market. I didn't draw that declining tops trend line, but we're really struggling here. Dow Jones Industrial, DIA, is what we're looking at. Same thing. We're not seeing the kind of performance we want out of it, especially when you compare it to the QQQ, which is moving exactly straight upward right now. Next up is the global markets, and I added the TSX because I know our Canadian friends did comment that they would like that on the chart, and of course I really should. And what I found, which was quite interesting, is that clearly Canada is, it never really had a problem with the bear market, really. We had the tops here and they're rising, and it did hit that area and it was overhead resistance. But look at the other markets around the world. We're just now starting to see Germany coming out of the bear market. It finally did rise above that declining tops trend line. And we're seeing still the same problems, though, across a lot of the countries. So, I mean, I find it interesting, Dad, that we're seeing the really, I would say, an outperformance by Canada right now in comparison to most of the other major indexes, but it does tend to follow us fairly closely, and we're now looking at rising tops coming through.
Yeah, I think they have an ETF for Canada, don't they? And I bet you if they do, you'll see that it's been making new highs along with the S&P 500.
All right. Yeah, I'll have to add, maybe I'll just throw that one in there instead next time.
Right.
Okay, next up, let's go look at the scoreboard indexes quickly. I'm going to start with the Dow. Like I said, underperforming, but right now holding this short-term support area. It does line up as well with the November top, and right now able to bounce off of that today, and starting to look a little bit more positive. But here's that PMO, and earlier today the readings were actually equal to each other. So I was waiting to see if we'd get that drop just below or if we'd be able to hold on. And it looks like the PMO, like I said, is clinging to its buy signal right now. Notice the OBV. It's much different from the OBVs we're going to get ready to look at. It's very flat right now. So just keep that in mind. Of course, we're looking at a rising wedge. I'm seeing that on so many charts right now. The weekly chart, really not much to say here. We've still got the PMO buy signal in place and really no deceleration on the weekly PMO. It's still rising nicely. We'll look at the NASDAQ 100. And here we go look at this OBV in comparison to the Dow. And it's been in a rising trend. It's just continued higher since that December low. Now, we won't see exactly that on the S&P 500, but again, log it away in your mind so when we get there. But we do have the buy signal. It's really not been in much danger over the past week of crossing below the signal line. So again, the NASDAQ 100 technology is still looking great. Notice here too, it's finding support at that short-term top, which coincides somewhat to the tops we saw back in August and October. The weekly chart for the NASDAQ. Breakout, got those all-time highs, and I think we all knew about that, a nice 1 3/4% rise this week for the NASDAQ 100. Still on the buy signal, everything looks pretty healthy. OEX is going to look a lot like the S&P 500 chart, so I'm actually just going to skip over to that. All right, there's that ascending wedge. I had drawn it right along the tops that we had here previously, and it looked like we had a breakout. We had just gotten those all-time highs, and it was breaking out of this bearish formation. But at this point, it got stopped at overhead resistance, and so I felt like it was really a better look to put that bearish ascending wedge back into play. And you can see today, we hit the overhead resistance, but really weren't able to get above it as far as the intraday. But of course, we did close at the top, which is always a nice bullish sign. And So we're still looking okay here, but I did think that wedge still is in play. But again, notice the difference in the OBV. Now, we had this area here where volume just was not holding up like it did on the NASDAQ 100. And right now I am a little bit concerned because that rising trend for the OBV looks like it's trying to be broken. But with today's volume bar and the addition, it's not too horrible right now. The weekly chart, here we are. Rising trend is still in play, PMO buy signal. As I was telling Dad before the show, my concern here would be just how steep the rising bottoms line is out of that December low. And it's very hard to maintain a rising trend that steep. So we probably are due for a bit of a pullback, or at least maybe some consolidation. We'll have to see. All right, let's look quickly at the indicators. Right now, climactic indicators really not telling us too much, although let's go ahead and annotate because I didn't have the final numbers in here when I looked at it earlier. I still am not seeing that. This is somewhat climactic, this reading, but there's still a lot of readings we saw above that. And certainly I don't see that as climactic here on the volume, advanced decline volume. Also, we're seeing the VIX pretty much centered in a low volatility Bollinger Band. I mean, it's getting very, very thin. When that happens...
It hit the bottom band yesterday, or almost, close enough to... So it's, it's all started heading up to the top band, but that's not that far away now.
No. And like I said, when you see those Bollinger Bands starting to shrink, it's sort of like when you get a chart pattern, a triangle or a wedge, and price gets so close to the end that something's going to happen. It's going to, and even in one day, when we start seeing the really thin bands, you could have a puncture of the lower one and come close to puncturing the top. So I'm not so certain how helpful the VIX is going to be here for a little while, but overall, when you look at it in the thumbnail, you can see it's pretty much right in there in the middle. So as far as the readings, this is somewhat climactic, but I don't see any climaxes here at this point to really identify as an initiation or an exhaustion. Okay. These short-term and intermediate-term indicators are really starting to bother me. Earlier in the week, I was feeling pretty bullish after we hit the all-time highs. These indicators were rising together at that point in time, right in here. And now we're seeing the Swenlin trading oscillator, the breadth one is rising, which is positive, right? You look at that and be pretty excited. But the problem is we're seeing a flat divergence here on the volume indicator. And actually, before I got that, the reading for today, we were seeing both a very significant divergence, I would say. They were following upward, and we still hadn't seen a bottom yet on the volume oscillator. So this, that might be a little bit, I don't know. I don't see it as really positive, but I'm not seeing it as quite the negative I did when I annotated the chart earlier. The intermediate term oscillators at this point, the ITBM and the ITVM, again, we really like to watch the difference between the breadth and the volume indicators. But as you can see, pretty much in the declining trend, we had the negative crossover, clearly in a divergence with price right now, a negative divergence. We'll have to keep a close eye on this, but this makes me a bit more nervous for the intermediate term. Not seeing a turnaround just yet, especially after we pop to new all-time highs. And that completes my portion. Let's go ahead and start looking at Carl's perspective on dollar, gold, oil, and bonds. It's all yours.
Okay, we had a breakout from the rising wedge formation. It's very loose wide rising wedge. You could almost call it a rising triangle. Mm-hmm. Getting a pullback, but it's certainly looking strong. I think you get a better picture when you look at the weekly. Let's check that.
All righty.
I think you got to click it again. Okay.
Just taking its thinking.
The got the breakout, but you can see there's really important resistance just ahead. And that resistance line, by the way, goes all the way back to 2007.
Yes.
So it's a significant line of resistance.
Yeah. Although I know we talk about it too, but a bullish outcome to a bearish formation is generally pretty, I find it extra bullish. And we do have the buy signal. What do you think of that?
I still say that's really significant resistance.
Yep. And here we go with gold.
We had the head and shoulders pattern and the price broke down through the neckline. And actually today it got right back up there on the neckline when it closed. So, and the daily PMO turned up. So maybe this is a fake out move and we're going to see higher prices.
Right.
Let's take a look at the weekly.
Look at the, I was noticing that.
Yeah, that's today, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or wait, no, that's yesterday.
Okay. Yeah, but it's negative sentiment. I can't think
right. It's bearish sentiment, but it's
as long as the sentiment is negative, you can't really expect that anything good is going to happen. When it does turn positive, then you worry about it getting too positive. But if it's going to be going up, obviously you're going to get some positive sentiment. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's just nobody's been excited about gold for how many? 2 years is it, or 3 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And longer, really. The weekly chart, instead of the head and shoulders, I chose a pennant there because it has a nice hole on it. Broke down from that today. I might be looking at drawing the bottom line differently so that it turns it into a flag.
Yeah, it's easy to correct here.
Especially with the price reversal today, up higher. There you go.
Yep.
And the PMO, weekly PMO is, due to change, but it's really flattened out and stopped right on that line. So that's interesting because I was more negative an hour ago, but looking at this latest chart, I see a little bit of hope there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because we go over these charts before the show, and a lot of them we don't have quite all of the information. So you're learning about it, and we're analyzing it almost real time with you. So
right before we've come up with a good story to cover our
yes.
Whatever. This is an interesting chart. USO broke out and gapped up on Monday, and because of the additional sanctions they're putting on Iran, but there was much follow through on it, as you noticed. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, it just rolled over and broke back down below where it started. So I think that the problem is that there's not a great big shortage in oil at this point. So they had that news that would have indicated a tightening of supply, but I just think there's a lot of oil out there. I don't think that high in 2018, I think that represents about $76 for crude. I don't think we're going to see that. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion at this point.
Right. That signal isn't good to see on that volume as well.
Right. Yeah, it's a volume increase. We got a PMO sell. Yeah.
Right. Pretty much almost a textbook island too.
Yeah, it is definitely.
Weekly.
Okay, we've got a new rising wedge formation here. It's not as tight as the one we had a few weeks ago, but it looks like it's going to be challenged in the bottom of that wedge next week. And the PMO, weekly PMO is still rising and even above the zero line now.
Okay, TLT.
This is a kind of a wacky chart. You had a flag formation breakout, and then now it's pulled back towards the point of breakout, and it's turned back up again. So I can't. That PMO looks a little flat, but yeah, you could see on the magnification that it turned up today. Let's look at the weekly.
Okay.
Okay. Again, you see the flag breakout, but on this chart, you can see there's overhead resistance, which price just sailed through on its way up, but then it just dropped back down through without any hesitation and bounced, and now it's heading back toward that resistance. My feeling from this chart, you got a PMO rising. I think we're going to look at it going up towards the overhead resistance 134. I don't know if it's going to make it that far, but I think it's trending up.
Sure. That's almost the target price too from that flag.
True.
All righty. Let's move on to the bonus. Everybody's ready for it, I know. We talk a lot about initiation climaxes, selling exhaustions. So let's actually explain how we look at them and find them.
Right. This is a little dense, but I think we'll take it one at a time. The big problem is when you have climactic activities, to try to figure out whether it's an initiation or exhaustion climax. And the first thing you want to do is look at how does the climactic activity relate to the existing trend. If you take the first one there on the left in October, okay, we had a dribble down trend from the top early October, and then you had that climactic information. The good thing about right now is we get to look at it with 100% hindsight, and we can't screw this up. But anyway, at this point in time, I would say it's an initiation climax, because it really, the trend had been up for so long before this, and then finally we got a breakdown that got something negative started, the initiation. And even though it, and if you look down, you see confirmation on the net breadth, net volume, and then also total volume for S&P at the very bottom. You can see there's some, unusually high volume there.
Next.
Okay, another thing about, we have large and small climaxes, but mainly for the significant ones, we want to look for moves that are large. We want large price moves to begin with. We'll look at some of the later ones that are not so big, but we'll get into that. But the ones that are really significant, large price moves, and go to that one at the end of October. And you can see where, it's another large price move down. Okay. that was an exhaustion climax. We wouldn't have known it at the time, but it's one of those things that when you see the climax, you got to start thinking, you know, and trying to figure out what it might be. And as it turns out, it was an exhaustion, and you can see that the price bounced up from there. Now the next one is another exhaustion climax. You see, it had that leg up at the end of November, and then the large down chop. And again, look at the excuse me, the net breadth and net volume really high. And total volume for S&P was high as well. Mm-hmm. Now here's a really interesting one. Is excuse me, the one at the towards the end of December. You can see there's a lot of large down moves, by the way, coming down to that climax. But so you would be looking at each one of them as possibly being a termination type of climax, but it just dribbled down, so you finally get really high net new highs, new lows, and net volume, net breadth, and then look at the volume for the S&P really hard. And so if you sat around and waited at 2 trading days, the next climax was an up move. It's initiation climax. And again, we can see the new highs contracted on that. I'm saying the new lows. But the thing to think about is on the new lows, they're not going to contract as fast because if you start out on a down with prices down for that day, you're going to be making a lot of new lows, which will be registered as new lows no matter where the market closes, even if it closes up. Mm-hmm. In other words, they don't have to close on their new low in order to get registered, to get counted. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we've got a very high net breadth and volume, and there was not a lot of volume, S&P volume, but look, it's the 26th of November, December, the day after Christmas. And we had very low volume on the 24th, of course, because that was a short day. So keeping that all in mind, so you had an exhaustion climax followed almost immediately by an initiation climax. So
yeah,
it's going to help you get yourself set for what's going to happen next. I mean, you're alert, you're waiting to see, you're extra focused on what's going to happen next. So
no, we got to close this out. My goodness.
Yes. Yeah.
But yes, we talk about these a lot. I know that in this area here, it was very confusing because you were getting what looked like climactic activity all along, but it was not registering. It was kept being an initiation. I kept looking at it, but at the same time, I thought, oh, it's time to turn around because of it. But we never got that. Anyway.